Welcome back to Decouple. Today I'm joined by Dr. Veronika Wendland, who is a scientist at the Herder Institute of Central and Eastern European Studies. And she is actually joining us on a pretty fateful day in German nuclear history. And that is, she's joining us in the final 24 hours of operation from the Grohnde nuclear power plant. Dr. Wendland, Anna, welcome to Decouple. It's a real pleasure having you here.
Hi, it's a pleasure to me as well. Thank you for inviting me.
So I gave you the briefest of introductions. I'd like to give you a chance to flesh that out a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Oh, shortly. No, so let us begin with the most important thing. I'm sitting here in my office at a German nuclear power plant, which is up to being phased out tomorrow in the evening. So, and it's one of the three large power plants in Germany which will be phased out tomorrow. So, because it's the end of 21, and this is written down in our nuclear law that the last 6 nuclear plants have to be phased out. So I am now here at one of them because I did many years of research here. It was in a way my industrial partner in my research on the history of nuclear safety and the human factor at the nuclear workplace. So I'm now right here from the shift, and 1 hour ago I was doing my observation works at the reactor building. So this is pretty actual what I'm doing here now. So my specialization is a history of science and technology. So of course I'm approaching this issue not from the engineering side, although I had to do lots of learning in engineering in order to do this work. This has to be a rather advanced transdisciplinary approach. So I did much of engineering, but I am no engineer. That's important to know, because sometimes people ask me, "Oh, can you help me? Is this or that nuclear power station, is it safe? Or what do you think about this and that system?" And then, of course, I have to forward you to the real specialists, to the engineers. I am a historian of this technology.
Okay. I'm personally fascinated by the human factors element. In my academic activity, I am a medical simulationist. And so we run rarely encountered resuscitation scenarios with, my colleagues in the emergency department or with residents and learners. And much of the sort of human factors culture, the best practices that we teach our learners is drawn from both, from what we call high risk industries like the aviation industry and the nuclear industry. So this includes things like, having a shared mental model, having a communication system in place where, it's as not hierarchical in terms of junior members of the team, having a permissive environment to share concerns, et cetera. So I'm really excited to talk about that element of your work. But first off, just tell me a little bit more, like, what is the mood in the plant right now? This is a big nuclear plant. It's 1,400 megawatts. It's pretty historic. I was reading that with the 3 plant closures happening, it's the equivalent of 15,000 wind turbines coming offline in a snap like that. So, I mean, how are you feeling? How are people in the plant feeling? This is an emotional time.
Yes, no, of course. Just at the moment we are here now, it's about 20 people now only at the plant, because the shift consists of 12 people, and they're the security people, and that's all. So it is for me. It was always fascinating to be at the plant in the evenings, in the nights, at the weekends, because I saw that such a small number of people can organize and manage such a large, highly automatized system. And so what do these 20 people now, what they are doing? In a way, they are doing the thing they always do if they phase out their plant for a normal maintenance outage. So the procedures are the same, and just we are now just preparing our auxiliary steam station, because the turbine will be switched out, and we do not have any more heat from the reactor from tomorrow evening on. So there is an auxiliary gas oil-fired station which will give us our process steam, and
right.
This is what we did start today in the afternoon, and tomorrow the procedures will go on. So the mood is very, as all these engineers and technicians in Germany always are. They, of course, are very sad on it, but they are doing their job, and they cannot think much about it because there's loads of jobs to do in
right.
such a slow down process at a nuclear plant.
And just to give people context, I had a Twitter post the other day, which was an aerial photo of Grohnde. And, this is a plant, 1,400 megawatts. And I was, pointing out on Twitter that it's kind of exists on the land footprint of a hobby farm, and it's situated in these, farmers' fields. It's got some trees around it. It's really a tiny, tiny land footprint. But putting out a significant amount of power, and this is all, of course, occurring in the context of the European energy crisis. This may be too much of a leading question, but what is anticipated to be replacing Grohnde's output in the next?
First of all, it will be lignite, because Germany has still a large share of lignite stations, and these are the cheapest and most reliable generators after nuclear. But as a matter of fact, they are very dirty, and this will be the outcome of that. And if we are lucky tomorrow evening, and there will be wind in our system, wind power, so perhaps it will be nominally replaced by wind turbines. But this will last perhaps half a day, or 1 day or two, and then again it will be lignite, or it will be natural gas, because the coal phase out is waiting us, or the Green Social Democrats Liberal coalition in our Berlin government aims to phase out coal up to till 2030. But I am in doubt whether they will be able to do that, because if they phase out nuclear, which is in fact the cleanest source, they won't be having a chance to phase out coal very quickly, because they need reliable generators, and unfortunately solar energy at the moment in our German winter is simply not existing. Yeah. And wind turbines are really not, they are intermittent, so it is not a safe generator.
It really feels like the promises and the plans and the modeling of the politicians and again the sort of academic energy modelers, it's like they've all gotten in a car together and they're stepping on the gas and they're heading for this brick wall of reality, which is these 2030 guideline roadmaps and goals are incredibly unlikely to be fulfilled. I was hearing as well that there's a big move towards replacing gas heat with heat pumps, which will again put an even greater strain on the electricity system. I was talking with Stefan Haufe, the German spokesperson of the German delegation at COP. It seems like we're shifting towards a really big reliance on gas, and that's obviously quite political. I do understand that you spent a fair amount of time in Ukraine, and I'm wondering if you have any sort of opinions or commentary on what's happening in Ukraine right now and the geopolitics of the Ukrainian-German relationship in the context of this new gas addiction.
Yes, that's a very interesting problem, because especially if regarding the Green Party's position, which is, as a rule, they are really very pro human rights and pro Ukrainian in this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which is de facto no conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but more or less, I would say, post-colonial conflict of a Russian empire, or a Russian nation, which still did not get to grips with what they want to be, an empire or a nation. And so they, in principle, they feed hopes which are 19th century style, the big nation which has to retake the territories back into the Commonwealth and so on. So this is the problem, and Yes, unfortunately, with every gas plant Germany will be building, and with every cubometer of Russian gas, natural gas, of course, we will finance Putin's military, and we will finance this aggression, which is going on at the borders of Ukraine. And I'm very concerned, which is because I studied in Ukraine and I worked and researched in Ukraine. And by the way, half of my family is Ukrainian, so I'm really concerned with it. But unfortunately, Ukraine has almost no allies. It's similar to the position of Israel. So they cannot rely on anyone. It's lip services done by the West in favor of Ukraine. And if it comes to the aggression, I'm afraid that it will be a very, very dramatic outcome for Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And we are, and the Germans, and this is what the Greens do not want to see, this interconnection between the German Energiewende, this is called energy transition, and our reliance on natural gas. And this is, of course, the big quandary in which Germany now sits in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I wanted to explore a little bit more your research. I'm getting the sense that there's this kind of twin tragedy. One of it is that we are vandalizing or sacrificing incredibly intricate and well-performing infrastructure, so-called climate cathedrals, clean energy cathedrals, industrial cathedrals, I think as Emmett Penny has put it. This seems like quite a sacrilegious thing to do in the face of the climate challenges ahead. Again, the 3 plants closing is apparently the equivalent of 15,000 wind turbines coming down in a couple of hours. But the other thing that's being lost is the human resources, the incredible teams that work together to run these plants safely. And I wanted to talk a bit more about that because I understand that's really the big area of your research is the human factor side. And as I was alluding to before, it's a big interest of mine as well. So tell me a bit about how you came to be interested in that and where your research started and I guess kind of where it's headed. And I guess, again, in the context of losing that human capital in Germany.
Yes, my own research started with a quite different starting point. It started de facto in Ukraine when I met people from Pripyat, from this nuclear community of Chernobyl's power plant. And then it's years and years ago. It was when I studied in Ukraine, and then I already got the idea. I should write something about these very interesting nuclear communities. So it's cities built around nuclear power plants. So-called Atomgrade. So it's nuclear cities. And then long time I did other projects, and when it came to the question. What to choose as an issue for my second book, I turned back to that. I began with these nuclear communities, and then I, of course, switched to the center of the community, so the city building factor in a way, or so it's called in Russian, the Gradoobrazующий factor. And this is a nuclear power plant, and I shifted my interest to this specificity of this nuclear workplace and this modernity experience in doing nuclear work, because of course, as you mentioned, it's a high risk or high reliability industry. It's not like a shoe factory or a automotive industry. It's something entirely different, and it especially in Ukraine, they made the worst experience with nuclear one can have. They have Chernobyl in their country. So for me, this was the starting point to come to grips how people are living with this and dealing and working with this technology. And then in a way, the focus or the mainstay of this work shifted more and more to these nuclear safety issues. And I did afterwards I did research for comparative reasons. I did research at German power plants, and that's the reason why I'm sitting here now. And why was this interesting for me? Because I, of course, as a historian, I asked myself as well, how come that in Germany, which is in a way an engineers nation, we have this really ridiculous coincidence that people in Germany are rather technically interested and enthusiastic on good technology, and they are making good technology. German nuclear power plants are among the best we have in this world. They are benchmarks in nuclear safety, and this is well regarded, and they have excellent credentials abroad. But at the same time, in Germany, we have this very strong tradition of anti-technicism, of anti-industrialism, of natural romanticism. It's a very strong tradition in the German bourgeoisie, which is, of course, in a way, a main factor in German discourse, because who is the dominant bearer of discourses? It's of course well-educated people, mostly from the German educated bourgeoisie, and this tradition is very, very strong here. So we have this very, very ambivalent interplay between these different traditions in Germany, and unfortunately, one of them, eco-romanticism, took the dominant side, and I think this is a phase Germany will go through, and we will recover from it, because now we will be making really bad experiences with it. I'm more or less convinced that we will, in the next years, we will get the fruits of what we began there, and so I think afterwards Germany will be revising and rethinking on this nuclear phase out, and we will be beginning a new era with it. But so far we have this problem. So far we have a strong ecologist, I would say conservatively ecologist tradition, which is now dominating our politics. And this is, in a way, I ask, of course, because why it's only on nuclear. Because, all these people who are anti-nuclear, they are very fond of renewables technology, and they are constantly talking on how great and smart and digital all these large technological systems with renewables will be then in the future. Mm-hmm. So it is not anti-technologism in a clear form, but it is a very weird way in conceptualizing one's views on how a society has ideally to be via technology. So they are not fighting for renewables because they like renewables technology so much, but they are fighting for renewables because renewables symbolize a society they think will be more human, more nature friendly, more sustainable than our present is. And on the other side, nuclear from them is only a symbol. They very often, I spoke with people of the anti-nuclear movement who even recognize that our plants are excellent technological systems. But in a way, they do not want, and they recognize that they are carbon free. But they say, we do not want to have these plants in the system because these plants block the system change we want to implement. And I think that's the crucial point. There is one part of the anti-nuclear movement which clearly hates and fears nuclear because, radiation fear and so on. And there's another part who simply hates nuclear because it stands in the way of transforming a system to the like they want to have it. And they do not understand, by the way, and this is a third aspect of this German problem, that we have almost no leftist pro-nuclear people. Yes, in other countries, it's a matter of fact, it's a very normal thing, being leftist and nuclear. In Germany, it is not. Although, of course, in the 60s and 70s, our social democrats were all pro-nuclear. Helmut Schmidt and Willy Brandt, our chancellors, are big figures in social democratic history. Of course, they were pro-nuclear. They would be rotating their graves now, seeing what is going on now here. But as a matter of fact, the left loosed nuclear on its way to the present, and that's in a way tragic for me, because I am doing all this research and all these publicistic things. I am, of course, doing it from a leftist perspective, and so I am pretty alone here in Germany.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a pretty lonely position to occupy. It is really interesting. I mean, I think something that is fascinating about nuclear is it does appeal across the political spectrum, and one hopes that portends a potential future where there can be a consensus around a technology that can deliver so much in terms of energy transition and decarbonization and energy prosperity and things like that. But I've definitely seen that as well, and it seems to be a feature, at least in North America, of this kind of new left ideology. Then there's a huge crossover and fusion, I think, of the environmental movement into the left, as well as the left really abandoning the workplace. Unions falling apart, and the left sort of finding its sanctuary in the academy, usually in liberal arts, not in engineering or science. And it has led to this kind of lack of engineering discipline, a lack of really understanding, the tools at our disposal in order to accomplish goals, and a lot of, as you were saying, romanticism. In terms of what you were describing with this vision, which I think it would be sort of like the kind of Amory Lovin's small is beautiful, decentralized, like having some sense of control. Like for me, that's kind of what ties together, other elements I think that I see in Germany in terms of kind of the natural health movement, the organic food movement, COVID vaccine hesitancy. That this all seems to be about the illusion of having control over technologies, over kind of what you put in your body, et cetera. And nuclear seems to represent this thing, which is, this centralized thing. It's not understandable or acceptable to people because it's big and,
Yes, of course. But, unfortunately, of course, it's the industry as well. Failed the nuclear industry in Germany failed in order to convey another image of nuclear. I am now here sitting at a nuclear power plant. I know how the life on a nuclear power plant shift is. So it is a very ordinary everyday life of mostly male workers, of course. And it's so, human, and it's very often it's funny. We are laughing very much. No, of course not today, but in a way, it's nice to be here, and it's nothing of this, image of inhumanity and abstractness and closeness we have in the outside. But of course, for the outside spectator or for the outside observer, if he's approaching this plant, he sees only these fences and these, all these, in a way, martial outlook of this station, and almost never you see people there. You see only these grand installations, and this is, of course, it is the German industry failed to convey something human out of this industry. So it was very easy for the anti-nuclear movement to forge these imaginaries of this centralist authoritarian technology. If they knew how anti-authoritarian good nuclear technology is, because if you do not have a questioning attitude, you cannot do good nuclear technology. In the outside, they do not know that, and they do not know that about simply the human factor, the human face of nuclear. And this is a tragic in a way. And many people told me, many of these engineers, they told me, yes, we never learned to communicate with the public. So it's not that what we are learning in engineering, when we study engineering. And such people as you, Anna, very often they told me, we had been needed such people like you, so these border crossers who can understand our technology, but they talk in another language to the people, and they can convey that to the outside. They didn't have these people, so this is a pity. Yes.
So talk in that language and give me your sort of, your case for nuclear as a leftist. Like, speak to those progressive values. This is your chance, I guess, to sort of to convey that, like why nuclear is consistent with those values that you hold as someone who identifies as being of the left.
Yes, of course, it is consistent with leftist projects if we agree that energy is a common, is a Gemeingut, as German, Allmende, as the Germans say. So if we regard energy as a common good, which we have to manage as commons and not as private property. So we can include nuclear very well into this setting, because I think what we have ahead is such for industrial states as Germany, the fourth largest industrial state in the world. It is such a huge task to decarbonize, and of course, never ever we will do that with wind turbines and solar PV alone. It is a matter of fact. So if we would be realists, we would say we need loads of electricity in order to not deprave the working class or the working poor, which is a larger and larger class in Germany. If we want, of course, to deprave them of their rights and their money, so go on further with this energy transition, because it's really, really expensive for the working people. And this, of course, is I think it's a danger for the whole process. And I would be liking to have a complementary approach to that. So we can, of course, renewables have their role to play. They have many advantages which they can play out in their field, but it's overloading them with expectations if we really want to have them electrify a country which, as studies say or estimates say, will be using 3 times more electricity than it uses today. So we must cover about 1,500 terawatt hours per year in Germany. Now it's about 500 terawatt hours per year. So the task is so ridiculously vast that I simply think that we cannot do that without great low carb generators, and nuclear is a great low carb generator. That's simply that. I even think that it's really these plants, these large ones, which can do the job, because small modular reactors are still not at place. And I think if we want to decarbonize in the next 15 years, it will be the job of these rather good, not perfect, but rather good generation 3+ installations, Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a step backwards, obviously. And, the excuse given to me by Stefan Haufe was, well, nuclear takes too long to build. And it's these.
Well, that's of course, that's bullshit, because too long is a relative thing. If you, of course, if you phase out running nuclear power plants, as the Germans do now, the too long argument is out mostly ridiculous. But even if you compare renewables only system with a nuclear and renewable system, it is not true to say it's to build nuclear. It lasts longer, because if you want really to decarbonize a 100% renewable system, that means that you have to phase out all coal and all natural gas. You cannot do it on the muscles of the fossils. You have to do it exclusively by renewables, and so. There's a big problem with these storage facilities, and which we almost do not have, and so supposedly to construct such a system with 100% renewables plus storage will last more time than the 10 to 15 years building, even maximum building time of a nuclear power plant.
Yeah. So you were mentioning, and Noah Redberg was echoing this as well, that the establishment was pro-nuclear in the 60s and 70s, and things obviously changed. It was an anti-establishment position to be anti-nuclear. Now the establishment is anti-nuclear in terms of most of the politicians and a lot of the media.
Mm. I do not still hear you. It stopped. Do you hear me?
Yeah. Sorry, it's on my end. I'll just start that. I'll just start the question again if you put your phone back where it was. Yeah, that was my end. So you were mentioning that the establishment, including the left parties in the 60s and 70s, were pro-nuclear. Obviously, there was an anti-establishment position that arose in the 70s, which was anti-nuclear, but that has now become the new establishment in terms of mainstream opinion amongst politicians and media. I have been seeing polls suggesting that a close majority of Germans are in opposition to this phase out. They may not be pro-nuclear people, but they say, hey, we shouldn't be phasing them out, before coal, or we should extend the life a little bit longer. Do you feel like things are starting to shift? When I was in Berlin at the kind of last stand for nuclear at the Brandenburg Gates, I was trying to engage and talk with many Germans that were passing by, and I have to say I had a 100% failure rate at engaging someone in a conversation about nuclear. It was pretty wild. Like I really felt that strong anti-nuclear sentiment. But you've been doing a lot of activism and advocacy. What have you been noticing in your interactions, and do you think that there's a shift maybe that can occur before the final 3 plants are supposed to come offline in 2022?
Yes, of course we have a shift. I think 2 years ago this began. The situation began changing a little bit. It began really in a top-down process. So it was people like me, so people who had some publicistic works on it or did research on it and had TV interviews and so on. And I wrote a memorandum together with a nuclear expert, Rainer Moormann, and we sent that to the parliament. And so we triggered a discussion, of course. And it is now going on. And as we know from the history of paradigm shifts or paradigm changes, it always begins like that, with these, punctual discussions, and then it trickles down to the very broad population. But it is, of course, I think it's not so representative if these passersby did not react to their question, because always Germans do not want to have, they do not like to be interrogated with a microphone and so on. So this is perhaps even not representative, because if you look on the recent polls, it is about 50%, even more than 50% of Germans who would agree with having these power plants running in order to make it easier for us to decarbonize. So it is in a way not rocket science to convince the people. But it is not these people who now, as you said it, it's not these people who are now deciding, because the establishment and, what's more important, the government now is these anti-nuclear people who, of course, connect anti-nuclearism to their political identity. So it is not to be expected from the Greens we all know that only Nixon could go to China. And so I think the Greens will someday perhaps change their position on nuclear, but it is not now, unfortunately. So we cannot save these nuclear power plants, because it's simply, this discussion is now triggered, it's going on, but it's too late to really to make that shift in favor of these last 3 German nuclear power plants. And this is, of course, due to this special constellation that our industry does not want neither, because they had 2 or 4, shifts in governmental policy towards nuclear, and now they are simply fed up. They say, we had yes, no, and now we are phasing them out, and we will never return to that, because state frauded us 2 times,
Right,
and I
right.
can, in a way, I can understand that. But on the other side, as I already mentioned, this German nuclear industry never had a vision, never had a really message. And if they had visionary leaders, which they do not have, because their leaders are as the typical German industrial leader is, very pragmatic but shareholder oriented and not visionary. Since they are not visionaries, they let go these chances they had. For example, after 2015, when the government signed the Paris Treaty, and when the task was given, how to decarbonize this society, they could have, of course, made a new attempt to introduce nuclear in this discussion. They did not, and so we are now, unfortunately, it is now by pure inert. How do you call it? Inercy or inertness. It is going its way. Although the discussion is already going in another direction. So it's this situation at the moment.
Yeah, I think most advocates, that. Like for instance, my local nuclear plant, I think, man, if only I'd been active 10 years ago and been making these arguments 10 years ago, maybe I could have shifted the discourse, because it is changing here in Canada as well in regards to our Pickering nuclear power station, which is scheduled for closure in a few years' time. I wanted to use the time we have left, because I know you have to get back to your shift, to further explore this idea of human resources and human factors and just the importance there, because I think there's a huge almost fetishization of design, and obviously that's quite important. The engineering is miraculous, but I think there's a real underemphasis in understanding the importance of the human factors and human resources. I think a lot of nuclear advocates, and maybe myself included, dream of a global Mesmer plan or more countries embarking on ambitious nuclear buildouts. But as we saw in my interview with Francois Perchet, there's kind of preconditions to that, both industrial in terms of having the capacity to build in a way in which the West is struggling with as we've deindustrialized, but also just in terms of those human resources, the engineers, the skilled tradespeople, et cetera. So you mentioned maybe Germany will change its mind and move back on nuclear at some point, but help us understand a bit more the tragedy of the loss of these human resources. Where are your coworkers going to be working? Are they going to leave the country and work in other nuclear plants? Are they going to be transitioning into other industries? Way too long.
No, at the moment they are in principle they're staying, because you're building back, as they call it, building back a nuclear power plant. It lasts very long years, and it needs expertise. Okay. So most of even the younger people so far are staying because they were offered nice job opportunities. The only thing is that, of course, this identity, of the producer of energy, this is, of course, definitely gone, because building something back, destroying something, even if it's highly qualified work, it does. When
you say building back, you mean decommissioning, or?
Yeah, decommissioning.
Okay.
This is the word. So the German word is building it back. Rückbau. It's that's decommissioning. Yeah. I just had forgotten this nice word.
No problem.
If we want to recommence the building of nuclear capacities in Germany, of course, the problem, which by the way hits the renewables as well, because we have a urgent need in expertise and trained personnel in all the other industries as well. So it is really a job constraint now here in Germany. And I personally think we can solve this problem with experienced personnel and specialized personnel only on a European scale. And I think if we will be returning to nuclear, this will be in a larger European framework. Perhaps we will have Grohnde, where I'm at the moment, is a so-called Gemeinschaftskernkraftwerk. In German, it's called a common nuclear power plant, which means it was a couple of communal and larger electricity providers, which through their their money together in order to build this station. And I think this will be the same on the European scale soon. So perhaps we will build together with the Poles or with the French. There will be no these. I think the time of these large national nuclear programs is over, and I think we have to resolve this problem on the European Union scale. So it is very, very important and very decisive what the European Union now will do with their so-called sustainability taxonomy. So it's a financing taxonomy. And it's dependent on whether the European Commission decides to include nuclear into this taxonomy or not. If they include, we will see investments into nuclear. If they do not, it will be much harder for nuclear to get.
I think
to get a foothold.
I'm very interested in the optimism, or it's very guarded optimism of yourself and some other German nuclear advocates that there may be a turnaround on this policy. They may actually build new nuclear in the future. It seems to me one of the big dangers of a complete nuclear phase out in any jurisdiction is that it could quickly lead to a law banning nuclear in the future. It's hard to ban nuclear if you have a bunch of plans running. I mean, I guess you can promise to phase it out, but what do you think the odds are of like an outright ban in the way that Ireland or Italy has a ban on nuclear, kind of sealing the fate?
Yes, of course, our anti-nuclear movement wants that. And we have, for example, our Ministry of the Environment, the former one, Svenja Schulze wanted such a thing. They call it the total phase out. So not only phasing out German nuclear power plants, but for example, we still have a fuel assembly industry in our country, right, which is not phased out so far because they are producing for power plants abroad as well. So. These people really want to stop everything. They really want to denuclearize Germany. But I think if they didn't afford to do that after Fukushima, they won't get it now, and they won't get it later because now the kairos for them is already over. The atmosphere is another. The premises have changed, and we have an entirely different situation now, and I think it will not come, I suppose, to change the constitution towards anti-nuclear paragraph or something like that. I don't suppose.
Right. So just in our remaining a couple minutes, again, I'm just trying to get a better sense of your research, the human factors part, maybe getting like right down to that human level of the people working in the plant right now. Like, what is so special about that in terms of having drawn you to study that, within nuclear in specific, those kind of human relations and teamwork?
Yes, it is. First of all, it's so specific because doing work at or with these nuclear installations, it is very often a very intermediary work. If I do not know how to put that in English correctly, but you are constantly working with things you do not see because they are not accessible during when the plant is working. You can even go into the reactor building, but you cannot see the reactor work. So you are totally dependent of what the instruments say to you. And so it is this highly intermediary work, this very abstract one, which makes it in one time easy to deal with it, to have all these highly high-tech instrumentation and control processes. On the other way, it alienates you from these installations. But there's of course exceptions. Do not think that we have no contact with the installation. The most work, in a nuclear power plant, it's not the reactor, which is totally automated. It's not reactor instrumentation and control, which is totally automated, but it is all these auxiliary systems and pumps and valves and tubes, which you have constantly, of course, to walk over and to control and to. It's very much hand-on work. And of course, every time if you have to do some repairs or you have to switch out systems, you have to do very much of practical work. So it is this ambivalence, on the one hand, this high tech, very intermediate work. On the other hand, it is a more or less hands-on workers' work, And in this, in this space, nuclear safety has to be positioned, because even these, these electricians, all these simple nuclear workers who are doing their walks at in the buildings are normal workers like in any other plants, because they have to do procedures, and they have to comply to specific technologies of how to communicate, how to transmit knowledge in between colleagues, but what is more important, between hierarchy levels. Very often, for example, the prehistory of nuclear accidents is rich of such examples where knowledge transfers had been inhibited. The Chernobyl accident is an excellent example for that. If knowledge is inhibited or knowledge transfers are inhibited in nuclear, this is really that's a endangering factor. And so they have to comply to these knowledge transferring procedures, and that's what makes the job so specific. And what is important as well, that is national technology cultures. I've been working in several nuclear plants in several countries, and it is very dependent on where this nuclear industry comes from in a country. For example, does it come from the military sphere, as it was in the Soviet Union or the States, or does it come from this energy industry sphere, as it was in Germany? And so we have in the US and the Soviet Union, but always also in Japan, for other reasons, we have very strong command and obedience systems. There's many hierarchies and command structures, and very, very much paperwork in these nuclear plants in the US and in the post-Soviet sphere. And in Germany, we have these, we have not only the reliance on that excellent technology, but we have very, very strong workers' identities, the identity of the well-educated, specialized German Facharbeiter, the specialized worker, who has a strong self-confidence and who is used to work very autonomously. Yeah? And this is more or less, I would say, it's more similar to the Canadian Canadian pattern of nuclear work than to the US one, for example. And it's, for example, thanks to this German tradition of educating workers and all these, I forgot the word, but independently of that, what I want to say is it is very dependent on national technology cultures how nuclear safety at the special place will be implemented. And it brings problems and advantages. For example, the advantage of the German system, it is this this confidence culture, so that the superior is very confident in what this experienced German worker does at his shift. But at the other way, we see disadvantages because these people with a very strong workers' identity, they tend to think, oh, I did it always this way, and I know it better than my superior, or I know it better than the procedure where it's written down because we did it always like that, or we found a way to do it like that, and it's better like that. So we have points where, of course, which are crucial for nuclear safety, which are not so good in such a confidence culture. So we have currently to work upon it in order to neutralize these things. although we have really very, very good features in this German national culture, I would say.
Well, it's very interesting that your role studying this kind of culture internationally, the sort of perspective that gives you, and the way that you sort of, as an inside outsider, can sort of feed that back. I think that's a really interesting contribution. We've been joking recently on the podcast because of the pretty lackluster performance in France in terms of the maybe some issues with maintenance that are leading to big outages in France. That it'd be great if those plants were run by German workers, so that they would be operational.
Yes, the French do even say, I was here, I was present here in Grohnde when we had a large Vano review, a peer review, and the peer reviewer team was almost exclusively composed of French people. And these French, shift supervisors and engineers, they said to me, they looked on this station and said, put it on wheels, bring it to France. It was really funny because, yes, there is differences. And the French know about these differences, of course.
Right. Well, if only that were possible, to do that, to save this plant and the other two that are shutting down tomorrow. We know that Germany will be dependent not just on Russian gas, but also on French nuclear for many, many years to come. Dr. Wendland, it was a pleasure having you on Decouple. Thanks for taking time out of your busy shift. Again, this is very historic having you. This isn't quite live, but having you speaking to us from the actual nuclear plant, which will be closed again within the next 24 hours. Thank you for being here.